Doing a research project, whether it's a dissertation for your degree, whether it's a project about current issues for a BTEC qualification, whether it's as an extended project as part of your A-levels or an IB diploma, whichever level it may be, doing a research project really allows you to express your passions and focus on things that you are interested in. However, at the same time, a lot of students find doing a research project really daunting because the rest of your course probably wasn't like this. So in today's video, I'm going to tell you about the first thing that you need to do when you are about to start your research project, which is making a research project plan. Oftentimes you will be asked to hand in a formal proposal, but sometimes you might not. But regardless, having a plan right from the start will save you time and will help get you better grades. So today I'm going to tell you how to do an awesome research proposal and how to ace your research project. A research plan or a research proposal should be undertaken right at the beginning of your research project. Now, there are certain parts that are absolutely integral when you do a research project and they must be included. So I'm going to talk you through each of these parts and how to make each part really great so that you have a good plan, you get the best grades and you do well. Your research plan should consist of hypothesis or research question, terms of reference, aims, objectives, planned outcomes, sources and resources, often referred to as a literature review, methodology, dates and timings, review dates, monitor process, contingencies, ethical issues, and evaluation. So first things first, you need to decide what you're going to research. And I have made a video all about how to choose an appropriate topic. So if you haven't decided on your topic yet, make sure you do check that one out because I'm not going to cover that in this video now. This video assumes that you have already decided on your topic. So the first thing that you need to do once you have decided is to select a hypothesis or a research question. You do not need both, one or the other is perfectly fine. Now, a hypothesis is basically a statement, and the aim then of your research project or your dissertation is to prove that hypothesis as being right or wrong, or maybe partially right and partially wrong. In contrast to this, a research question is a question, and the aim of your project is to answer said question. So let's take an example. Perhaps you want to research the environmental impacts of tourism in Costa Rica because you've spent a lot of time there, you're really interested in it, you're passionate about sustainability. You could develop a hypothesis that states tourists have a negative environmental impact in Costa Rica. Now that's quite broad, but we could work with that. Alternatively, you could have a research question that says, do tourists have a negative environmental impact in Costa Rica? Essentially, it's going to be the same project either way. So it's really preference. What would you prefer? Now, once you've established your hypothesis or your research question, you should have some very clear terms of reference. Now, this only needs to be a very small section of your research proposal, probably only a couple or a few lines. And all you are doing here is literally stating what is the purpose of your project. You should really also very briefly just mention why this project is worth doing, why it's important. So it could include a tiny bit of background on the issue, or it could just simply say that, this is a growing trend or something like this. After this, you will usually break it down a bit more into aims and objectives of your project. So be specific here. You could say, my first aim is to review the current literature on the environmental impacts in Costa Rica. Your second aim or objective could be, I will interview 30 tourists who have travelled to Costa Rica, or whatever is appropriate for you. Your third objective could be to analyse the impacts of tourism in relation to the current literature surrounding tourism in Costa Rica. Your aims and objectives should be really clear, really identifiable, and they should basically outline what you plan or you aim to achieve in your research project. Now, when you start a research project or even when you just start thinking about it, you should have some idea in your head of what you're going to achieve at the end. There should be a reason to do your project. So for the next section, planned outcomes, all you need to do is state, this is what I think the end result will be. In your final research project, you will have a comprehensive literature review, which essentially reviews all of the literature that, or as much as you can, of the literature that already exists in this field. So if you are studying the environmental impacts of tourism in Costa Rica, you will want to have a look at some generic literature about environmental impacts of tourism, as well as looking at case studies in Costa Rica and what has already been identified and what we already know, and anything else that you might think is relevant. So for your research proposal, of course, you haven't done all of that reading yet, but you do need to show an awareness of what's out there and what's not. So for your research proposal, you should put it together a short section, and obviously your word counts will vary depending on what the requirements are by your college or your university, but you should outline a few key sources, a few key facts, and indicate that you will be doing much more reading in this area. You should also have a bibliography at the end of your research proposal. So whilst you might not have the capacity right now to do a full literature review and reference lots and lots of sources, you should put lots of sources that you have come across, but maybe you haven't had time to read them in depth yet, that you think look relevant, and compile a list of those in a bibliography which will go at the end of your research proposal. That shows that you've got really good awareness, that shows you know what you're doing, it shows you've got that direction and you've got a plan. The next thing that you really need to think about when you are doing a research proposal is to think about what resources are required and how are you going to make sure you have the adequate resources. So some key things for you to consider are time. Do you have enough time to do the research project you want to do? If it's too broad, then you need to narrow it down. If it's too simple, maybe you need to add a little bit of depth. Do you have the materials that you need? Are you planning on doing some kind of experiments, scientific experiments? Do you need particular chemicals or something like this? Do you need perhaps access to printers and papers to print out questionnaires because you want to do questionnaires out in the street and ask people to fill them out? What things do you need? Can you get access to it? Is it feasible? You put that in this section. And what about your personal skills too? Do you have the skills to do it? If it is, say you're doing a form of ethnography, so maybe you're watching people and observing, have you had any training in that? Do you know what you're doing? If not, maybe switch your research method, which we're going to come to in a moment, to something that you do have a bit more experience or expertise in. Lots of us have done questionnaires, for example, in our lifetimes, so maybe a questionnaire might be something that's a little bit more achievable for you. And then we come on to the methodology. So all research projects should have an element of primary research. So you've already said in your literature review that you're going to look at secondary data. So secondary data is data that somebody else has already produced and put in a book or a website or a video or wherever. Primary data is data that you collect yourself, i.e. going out and doing a questionnaire, interviewing somebody. So in this section, you need to know what you're going to do and why. You don't need to go into loads of detail, but you do need to have the structure and the ideas in place. Things that you should consider at this point are, is it intervention or non-intervention? Will you be doing action research? Will your data that you collect be qualitative or quantitative? Will your data be reliable and valid? How will you gather your sample size? What is your sampling method? Now, if these things don't make much sense to you, don't worry. I will cover them in a future video that will be coming out very soon. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure you do subscribe so that you get a notification once that video is released. The next thing that you really need to do is to look at your timings and make a plan. Now, whether you are assessed on this and graded on this or not, this is a really important part of a research project plan or research proposal. But but most people don't do it. What I recommend you do is to create like a template. Maybe you can use a calendar. The calendar on your phone would do, for example, a calendar on your wall, or you could print something out. Whatever works for you best. Take a calendar and look at how many weeks do I have till I have to submit this project? What things do I need to complete? Block out the holidays. Block out when you're at work. Block out when you're in other lessons, etc. And then work out how much time do I have? What you then want to do is to have a steady pace over time where you can do different parts of your research project. Now, the problem that lots of students have is that a research project is a big piece of work, and it's bigger than other pieces of work that you have probably done in the past. And you haven't necessarily been required to forward think so much and to plan. Maybe you normally do 2,000 word essays. Well, that's a bit smaller than a 10,000 word dissertation, for example. The absolute worst thing that you can do is to leave it all to the last minute, because what happens is people have great literature reviews, okay methodologies, and their later parts of their research project, namely the results and the analysis chapters, absolutely stink. Trust me, I know, I've marked probably thousands of them, and this happens a lot. It's so obvious when a student has taken a month to write their literature review and 2 weeks to write the rest of the project. Oftentimes, and do check with your own college or university, but oftentimes the results and the analysis section actually is worth the bulk of the marks. So you can have a wonderful literature review, but if your results and analysis is rubbish, then overall your marks are not going to be good. So to stop that from happening, it is so important that you plan your time. Things happen in life, life happens, you might not always stick to it exactly, but to have that plan in place is a really great starting point to make sure that you allow enough time for each part of your dissertation. And on a side note, I'd just like to add really quickly that many employers, when you go for an interview for a job, will actually ask you about your dissertation. And it's a sign to them what you're interested in, but also that you are capable of doing independent work, of planning your own time, studying independently. Now, if you are feeling a little bit daunted by all of this and you think, blimey, this seems really quite overwhelming, trust me, it's actually not. I do have a really comprehensive study guide that can be super helpful for you. It's totally free. Click in the link below and download it, and I'm sure that that will give you a bit of extra confidence, give you a boost in the right direction. And don't forget to make use of whoever is supporting you with this research project. So that could be a dissertation supervisor, it could be your class tutor, it could be a subject specialist, whoever it is there to guide you and give you advice. So make good use of that and give them parts of your work to review if they are happy to do that, and ask them questions and ask for feedback, because that really will help you to get a really good grade. And often they are also the people who are marking your work. So if you're going off in the wrong direction, they're going to tell you that, and they're going to give you constructive feedback so that you can really maximize your grades. Another really important part that lots of people forget when they are planning for their research project is ethics. Now, more than ever, ethical practice is really in the public eye, and lots of colleges and universities will now ask you to complete ethical forms. They'll ask you to get ethical approval. Now, what this means is that your research project is fair, it's not unkind in any way, you're not cheating in any way, you're treating anyone who might be involved in your research project fairly and appropriately. And this is likely to include things such as confidentiality, so telling people who are involved in your research that their names will not be used. Getting permission, so for example, not just talking to somebody and asking them questions and then writing that up in your project, but actually saying to them, can I ask you some questions for my project? Integrity, so just making sure that you are transparent and you have integrity throughout the process. Keeping any records that you need, acknowledging other people's work, so referencing appropriately. And if referencing doesn't come easy to you, I do have a comprehensive video on that too. And anything else that could be an ethical issue. I once had a student who wanted to do a project about airlines and should they charge people more if they weigh more. Believe it or not, this does actually happen in some parts of the world when you are on light aircraft. And it's kind of a valid point because more weight uses more fuel, costs the airline more. So you can see that there could potentially be some justification there, but we don't like talking about our weight. Is it ethical to ask people about their weight? I don't know, it's a grey area. But if you were to ask people what their weight is as part of your study, whoever is doing your ethical approval might say, no, that's a bit of a grey area. I don't want you to do that. People might not like that. So anything that you think could maybe upset people or have some negative implications in whatever way you see that could occur, you might want to double check that with your supervisor or whoever is supporting you with your research project. And last but not least, you will probably want a small section at the end of your research plan about evaluation. So in this section you will say, how will you evaluate your project? Is the data that you collected reliable? Was the sample suitable? How could it have been improved? What were the limitations? Etc. Now, a few general tips I would give is to obviously proofread your project, have lots of references in there, have a nice comprehensive bibliography, make sure you reference correctly as well, of course, and just generally be able to have a really good idea of what you're doing. And if somebody was to come to you and say, tell me about your research project, you should be able to tell them. And if you're not that confident in what you're going to do, then maybe you need to do it a different way around. But ultimately, whether you are graded for it or not, your research project plan is really important. It's important to get you in the right mindset, to structure your work, to plan it, to time it, etc. So if you have found this video helpful, please do give this video a like so that YouTube will share it to more students just like you. And I've got lots more videos on research methods, so make sure you check those out